It was New Year's Eve, and just as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the front door swung open, and my Uncle Gerald stepped inside without warning. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, and hadn't visited in years, but there he was in a crisp suit, his eyes sharp and restless. He scanned the room once, then fixed his gaze on me. "Lucas," he said firmly, "how's that $2.5 million trust fund I set up for you 5 years ago?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. The chatter around the table died instantly. My heart pounded against my ribs as I struggled to respond. Finally, I choked out the only words I could muster. "What trust fund? I've been working 3 jobs just to survive. I don't have a trust fund." The color drained from the room. Gerald's face hardened, his jaw tightening as his eyes shifted to my parents. I followed his stare, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. My mother's face turned pale, her hands trembling against the table's edge. My father's shoulders stiffened as he stared at his plate, avoiding everyone's gaze. Gerald's voice rose, thick with fury. "Don't tell me you never gave it to him. That money was his right. That money was his future." My parents didn't answer. Their silence filled the room with a weight heavier than words ever could. I sat in disbelief, my mind racing with questions I couldn't stop. Why had I never heard of this? Why had I been breaking myself to survive if a fortune was meant for me all along? And why were my parents looking like the walls had finally collapsed around them? That was when Gerald turned back to me, his face burning with anger, and said something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. "My name is Lucas Bennett. I'm 25 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I came from a working-class family that struggled to stay afloat. I grew up thinking hard work was the only way to earn respect, and that survival came from grit, not privilege. That belief shaped me, hardened me, and often left me wondering if my life would ever be more than endless shifts and unpaid bills. At the time my uncle walked in, I was living through the hardest season of my life. I juggled 3 jobs, each grinding me down differently. By day, I worked behind a convenience store counter, forcing smiles as customers rushed through with coffee and cigarettes. After clocking out, I switched to a delivery driver's uniform, crisscrossing the city in an old car that rattled louder than the radio. Some nights, barely able to keep my eyes open, I took on handyman work, patching drywall or unclogging sinks in apartments that smelt of mildew. I did it all because I had no choice. Rent never waited. Groceries came with receipts I could barely cover. Even a simple doctor's visit was something I delayed, convincing myself I could endure the pain in my back or the throbbing in my temples. My life was a cycle of fatigue. Still, I clung to hope, telling myself that someday all this effort would mean something, that maybe I'd find a way to break free. My parents rarely spoke about money. My mother, Ellen, always insisted we were fine, even when the refrigerator was half empty or the power company's final notice slipped under our door. She said every hardship was a lesson. "Hard work builds character," she repeated often. She meant well, and I believed her because she was the one person who never stopped believing in me. My father, Henry, was different. A man of few words when he spoke. It was about responsibility and toughness. "Focus on getting through the week," he'd mutter when I complained about exhaustion. He worked long hours in construction, his hands rough and scarred from years of labor, but he shared little beyond the basics of his day. I wondered if he noticed how hard I worked or if he thought this was just how life was supposed to be. Despite the grind, I tried to keep peace at home. My parents were all I had, and even when frustrated, I told myself I'd make them proud someday. That belief carried me through nights when my body wanted to give up. I thought we were a team facing the world together. I had no idea secrets lurked beneath the surface, ones they never dared tell me. New Year's Eve should have been a celebration. That night, we sat around a small wooden table in our living room, wearing flimsy paper hats my mom bought at a discount store. She cooked a modest dinner of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, stretching every dollar as always. A bottle of cheap champagne sat unopened on the counter, waiting for midnight. I glanced at the clock, then at my phone. Friends were posting photos of glittering downtown parties with open bars, sparkling dresses, and confetti showers. I felt a pang of envy but pushed it aside. This was my family, and though simple, I told myself it was enough. As I sat there, I studied my parents. My mother smiled, trying to keep the mood light, but her eyes betrayed a growing heaviness. My father was quiet as usual, carving his chicken with slow, deliberate movements. I wondered if he noticed how different our lives were from others, or if he'd accepted this as our place in the world. I raised my glass of soda and said, "Here's to a better year. Maybe this one will finally turn things around." My mother smiled faintly and clinked her glass against mine. My father nodded but said nothing. For a moment, I felt the sting of silence, the kind that reminds you how much you want to be heard but never are. I pushed it down, reminding myself to be grateful. At least I had them. At least I wasn't alone. At least there was food on the table, however modest. That was the story I told myself, the one that kept me from resenting the long hours and constant struggle. But as I watched the seconds tick closer to midnight, I couldn't have imagined everything I believed about my family was about to collapse. I thought the year ahead might bring better luck, maybe stability. Instead, it brought a revelation that tore apart every assumption I'd built my life on. When the knock came at the door and my Uncle Gerald stepped inside, my world shifted forever. The sound startled us all. We weren't expecting anyone. I turned in my chair and saw a tall figure step inside with confidence, as if he owned the place. My breath caught when I realized it was my Uncle Gerald. I hadn't seen him in years. He was my father's older brother, but I'd never felt close to him. Where my father looked worn from labor, Gerald carried a sharpness that unsettled people. He wore a tailored suit, even on a holiday night. His silver hair neatly combed back, he said flatly, his presence, his voice carrying authority and judgment, pushing out whatever warmth we'd managed settling on me during dinner. Then, without a smile or small talk, he leaned forward and spoke the words that stopped my world. "So, Lucas, how's that $2.5 million trust fund treating you?" I blinked, certain I'd misheard. My fork clattered against my plate. The room went silent, so quiet I could hear the hum of the kitchen refrigerator. My mouth went dry, but I forced out words. "What trust fund? I've been working 3 jobs just to get by. I don't have a trust fund." For a moment, Gerald's face didn't move, as if testing my sincerity. Then his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and anger sparked in his expression. He turned to my parents, and in that moment, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to something darker. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising with controlled fury. "You mean to tell me you never told him? You kept everything from him?" My mother froze, her hands trembling against the tablecloth, her face pale, staring at her plate as if it could shield her from the storm. My father didn't lift his eyes, carving his chicken slowly, mechanically, refusing to acknowledge the words. I looked at them both, my heart hammering. "Mom, Dad, what is he talking about?" Neither answered. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it, shaking her head slightly. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. Gerald's voice cut through like a blade. 5 years ago, I set up a trust fund for Lucas. $2.5 million. It was his inheritance, his future. And you mean to tell me you let him break his back for scraps while you hid it from him? I stared at my parents in disbelief. "Is this true? You knew about this? You knew and said nothing while I worked nights and slept in my car between shifts?" My mother whispered, "Lucas, please." But her voice broke and faded. My father still refused to look at me. His silence was louder than words. Anger surged in my chest, flooding me in a way I'd never felt before. I slammed my hands against the table. "Answer me. Is it true?" Finally, my father lifted his eyes, glaring at his brother. "This isn't your business, Gerald." "Not my business." Gerald roared. "This is my nephew's life. This is his birthright, and you've buried it under your lies." The tension grew unbearable. I could barely breathe. Questions rattled in my head faster than I could process. Why had I never been told? What were they hiding? What could justify letting me suffer when there was money meant to give me a future? I turned to my mother, desperate for truth. Why? Why didn't you ever tell me? Tears welled in her eyes. She reached across the table, but I pulled back. Her voice cracked. We thought it was better this way. Better? I shouted. You thought it was better for me to think I had nothing, to believe I had to fight every day just to survive, while you hid a fortune that was mine. Gerald slammed his fist against the table, rattling the dishes. Enough. He deserves to know everything. You can't keep hiding this. Not anymore. My father's face hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes dark with anger. For the first time, I saw fear in his expression. He'd always been quiet, but now he looked cornered. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Gerald's fury, my mother's guilt, my father's silence. It all built into a storm about to break. I knew whatever secret they'd kept was bigger than money. I pushed back my chair, standing so quickly it nearly toppled. I'm not a child anymore. Stop protecting me. Stop lying to me. Tell me the truth. My voice shook with rage and desperation. My chest rose and fell as if I'd run a marathon, but I wouldn't back down. I'd spent my life staying quiet, working hard, accepting scraps, and believing that was my destiny. Not anymore. Gerald rose to his feet, towering over the table, his voice thunderous. He's right. He's old enough, and you can't keep him in the dark any longer. The truth will come out tonight. My parents sat frozen, pale, trembling. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. I knew something irreversible was about to be revealed, something that would tear apart the life I'd known. The air felt suffocating. Gerald's words echoed like a hammer striking steel, and my parents trembled under his accusations. I stood at the table's edge, fists clenched, heart racing, my voice raw from demanding answers. For years, I'd obeyed their lessons, believing every word about hard work, sacrifice, and humility. I'd thought my exhaustion was noble, that the blisters on my hands and bags under my eyes proved I was building character. Yet here I stood, confronted with evidence my life was built on deception. The people I trusted most had kept me in the dark. I took a step toward them. I want answers. Not later, not tomorrow, right now. You let me break myself for years, while you watched. You owe me the truth. My mother shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. Lucas, please, she whispered, trembling. This isn't the way you should find out. Find out what? I shouted. That my life could have been different? That I didn't have to sleep in my car between shifts? That I didn't have to eat ramen every night while a fortune sat somewhere with my name on it? What else have you kept from me? My father finally looked up, his eyes cold, jaw stiff. You're my son. That's what matters. I gave you a roof. I gave you food. I taught you what it means to fight for survival. Anger boiled in my chest. You gave me silence. You gave me lies. That's what you gave me. Gerald stepped closer, his hand firm on my shoulder. You're right to demand answers. You've been treated unfairly. I won't stand by while they keep burying the truth. My father glared at him. Stay out of this, Gerald. You've meddled enough. This is our family, not yours. But Gerald refused to back down. He's Nathan's son, not yours, Henry, and you know it. The words hit like a punch, but I refused to collapse. I steadied myself, refusing to let them control my life any longer. My mother gasped, covering her mouth, as if Gerald had ripped away her last layer of protection. I turned to her. Is that true? Is that what this is about? Tell me who I am. Tell me who my father is. She reached for me, her voice cracking. Lucas, please listen. We were only trying to protect you. We wanted you to have a normal life. We thought keeping it from you would keep you safe. Safe from what? I demanded, my voice shaking but forceful. Safe from knowing the truth. Safe from my own life. You say you wanted me to be normal, but nothing about this is normal. You watched me fall apart while you kept secrets that could have changed everything. That's not protection. That's betrayal. For the first time, I saw my mother collapse under her guilt, She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. My father sat stiff and silent, his pride chaining him to his lies. I straightened my back, drawing a deep breath. My voice lowered, sharper, steadier. You don't get to decide what I know anymore. You don't get to keep me in the dark. Tonight, I want the truth. All of it. No more excuses. Gerald nodded beside me. He's right. You had your chance to explain. Now he deserves to hear what's been hidden for far too long. My father slammed his hand against the table, rattling the dishes. You think you know what's best for him, Gerald. But you don't. You never did. You come in here with your money and lectures, acting like you care. But where were you all these years? I was honoring Nathan's wishes, Gerald snapped. I gave him a future that you stole. You took his legacy and buried it. And for what? To keep control? To hide your shame? Their voices rose, clashing like thunder. But I no longer felt like a bystander. I no longer felt like the quiet son who nodded and obeyed. This was my life they were arguing over, my future they'd stolen. I slammed my fist down harder than both of them, the sound cutting through their shouting. Enough. You can argue about who was right or wrong, but this is my life. I'm the one who lived it, not you. So I'm telling you now, I won't leave this room until I know everything. The room fell silent. My mother's sobs slowed into quiet gasps. My father's chest heaved with anger, but he said nothing. Gerald stared at me with approval, as if seeing a strength in me buried under years of silence and obedience. I stood unshaken. For the first time, my words carried weight. My demand for truth couldn't be ignored. Gerald's eyes locked on mine. Then you should hear it from me. Tonight, you'll finally know who you are. My pulse quickened. Every nerve braced for the truth that would change my life forever. The room felt frozen, as if the walls held their breath. My demand had shattered the silence, and there was no turning back. Gerald stood tall beside me, his eyes locked on my parents. My mother wept quietly, and my father sat rigid, his face pale yet defiant. The tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Gerald's voice broke the stillness, steady and sharp. Lucas deserves the truth. He's lived his whole life, carrying a weight that was never his to bear. Tonight, he learns who he really is. My chest tightened. I gripped the chair to steady myself, bracing for words that would change me forever. My mother's shoulders shook, and she whispered through tears, "Please, Gerald, don't." He ignored her plea, his eyes never leaving mine. "Lucas, Henry is not your biological father." The word struck like a hammer. My knees weakened, and for a moment, I thought I'd collapse. Every childhood memory, every lesson, every stern glance, every struggle twisted into something unfamiliar. I turned to my father, or the man I thought was my father, searching for denial, anger, anything to suggest this wasn't real. But Henry sat stone still, his silence confirming everything. I stumbled back, shaking my head. "You're saying the man who raised me isn't my father?" Gerald stepped closer, his voice firm. "Your real father was my brother, Nathan Bennett. He was a good man, Lucas. He loved you before you were born. He wanted to give you everything he never had." My heart pounded, so hard I could hear it in my ears. The name sounded distant yet familiar, like a shadow I'd always known but never understood. "Nathan," I whispered. "Why have I never heard about him?" My mother lifted her face, eyes red and swollen. Her voice shook. "Because Nathan died before you were old enough to know him. He was your father, Lucas. He was the love of my life. But after his accident, I married Henry because he promised to raise you as his own. I thought it was the best way to give you a stable family." I staggered back as the truth unraveled. My chest burnt with betrayal. "You lied to me my entire life. You made me believe Henry was my father, while you hid the truth about the man who actually was." Henry's voice cut through, deep and unyielding. "I raised you, Lucas. Blood doesn't change that. I put food on the table. I gave you discipline. I kept you alive." I snapped, my voice raw with anger. "You kept me alive, but you also kept me blind. You let me believe a false story about myself while I struggled every day. And all the while, there was a trust fund waiting for me, Money my real father left me. You let me suffer while you buried his legacy. Gerald's face burnt with fury as he pointed at Henry. You robbed him of his inheritance. That money was meant to give him the life Nathan dreamed for him. You let him scrape and bleed for years while you sat in silence. Henry's face hardened, but his eyes flickered with guilt. He needed to learn the value of hard work. Money makes people soft. I wasn't going to raise a spoiled boy. Hard work. I shouted, my voice cracking. I've worked myself into the ground. I've lost sleep. I've skipped meals. I've missed out on life because I thought I had no choice. And all this time, you let me break myself down while you kept his gift locked away. That wasn't teaching me a lesson. That was cruelty. My mother reached for me, tears spilling. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment. We thought if you grew up without knowing about the money, you'd learn strength. We thought it was the only way. I pulled away, my throat raw. Protecting me? You didn't protect me. You stole from me. You stole my chance to know who I really was. You stole my right to know my father. Gerald's voice softened, though his anger still burnt. Nathan loved you, Lucas. He told me to make sure you had everything you needed. That trust fund was his promise to you. He wanted you to grow into the man he knew you could be. And I won't let that promise be buried any longer. I looked at Henry, the man who'd raised me, the man I'd called father. Why? Why would you do this to me? Was it jealousy? Was it control? Did you ever even love me? His face twisted with pain, but his words were steady. I raised you as my own. That was love, Lucas. Maybe I made mistakes, but everything I did to keep you strong. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. You kept me strong by breaking me. You kept me blind so you could play the role you wanted. You never gave me a choice. The truth stood heavy and undeniable between us. My real father was gone. My inheritance had been hidden. The man I trusted most had built my life on lies. I felt like the floor had vanished, leaving me in free fall. Yet I also felt resolve. The truth was mine now. No more silence, no more secrets. I was no longer the obedient son who accepted hardship without question. I was Nathan's son, and his legacy would no longer be denied. As fireworks exploded outside, rattling the windows with bursts of light, I stood taller. My life had been torn apart, but I knew this was the night it would finally begin. The fireworks roared through the night sky, but inside that small living room, the celebration felt hollow. My life had been broken open. I stood in the same house I'd always known, surrounded by the same people I'd called family. Yet nothing felt familiar anymore. My hands trembled as the truth settled deeper into my chest. Nathan was my father. He'd left me a future, and the people who should have loved me enough to tell me had chosen silence instead. I sat down heavily in the chair I'd pushed away. My legs felt weak, my chest tight. My mother reached for me, but I pulled back. I wasn't ready for comfort. Not from her. Not when her silence had cost me so much. She lowered her hand, tears spilling freely. I could tell she wanted to explain, to soothe, to hold me like when I was a child. But the distance between us was too wide now. Henry sat across from me. He wasn't crying. He rarely showed emotion. But tonight there was something new in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also fear. He knew he no longer had the same hold over me. His authority, his silence, and his lessons built on hardship meant less now that I knew the truth. Gerald stood beside me, almost like a guardian, though I wasn't sure I was ready to trust him either. He'd kept this secret for years, even if he claimed it wasn't his place to reveal it sooner. Still, he was the only one who'd spoken with honesty, who'd looked me in the eyes and refused to let me stay in the dark. I found my voice low and heavy. All those nights I thought I was nothing. All those mornings I woke up wondering if I'd ever escape this life. You knew I had a chance. You knew I had a father who wanted me to be secure, and you took that away from me. My mother sobbed harder. We thought it was the best way. We thought if you grew up without relying on money, you'd be strong. We thought you'd be safe from disappointment. I shook my head. Safe? I was never safe. I was exhausted. I was hungry. I was desperate. That wasn't protection. That was cruelty disguised as love. Henry spoke, his voice sharp but strained. You needed to learn the value of survival. You would have wasted that money. You would have turned soft. The anger rose again, but I kept my voice steady. You never gave me the chance to prove who I was. You never let me choose. You decided for me, and that's not love. That's control. The room went quiet. My mother's cries faded into sniffles. Henry stared at the floor. Gerald kept his hand firm on my chair. I thought about Nathan, the man I never knew. I imagined him picturing me, his son, deciding to build a future for me. I imagined him working, saving, and trusting those around me to honor his wishes. He'd loved me enough to plan for a life he'd never see me live. And yet, all of that had been hidden, stolen by silence. As the reality sank deeper, I realized something crucial. Money wouldn't heal this wound. The trust fund might change my circumstances, but it wouldn't erase the years of struggle, the nights of loneliness, or the betrayal that shaped my identity. What mattered more was the truth. The truth gave me a choice. The truth gave me freedom. I stood again, taller, steadier. My voice carried a calm I hadn't felt before. I can't change the years I lost. I can't change what you chose to hide, but I can choose what happens now. From this night on, no one decides for me. I'll know my father's story. I'll claim the life he wanted me to have, and I'll live it with the strength I built in the shadows you forced me into. My mother sobbed into her hands, whispering, "I'm sorry." Again and again. Henry said nothing, sitting like a man defeated, stripped of the role he'd clung to for decades. Gerald nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. I walked outside into the cold air. Fireworks still burst across the sky, painting it gold and red. Neighbors cheered in the distance, their voices carried on the winter wind. For them, this was a celebration. For me, it was something else entirely. It was the night I stopped being blind. It was the night I learned who I really was. I looked up at the sky and thought of Nathan. I didn't know his voice, his laugh, or the way he carried himself, but I knew he loved me. I knew he believed in me enough to fight for my future, even when he wouldn't see it. That knowledge filled me with strength I'd never felt before. I turned back to the house, knowing the relationships inside would never be the same. The lies had destroyed the foundation we'd stood on. But I also knew something else. The truth had set me free. I wouldn't carry their silence any longer. As the new year began, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't waste the life my father wanted for me. I wouldn't bury the truth again, and I'd never let lies define me. Family isn't about hiding secrets. Family isn't about control. Family is about honesty. If you're keeping the truth from someone you love, believing it protects them, you're wrong. The truth might hurt, but lies destroy. And I refused to let lies define me anymore. The sky thundered with fireworks, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of beginning. My life had been broken open, but in that brokenness, I'd found something more powerful than money or security. I found myself. That night changed everything. I walked into the new year no longer the same person. I carried anger, yes, but also clarity. The truth gave me the chance to start over, to reclaim the life meant for me, and to step out from the shadows of lies. Fire, thanks for listening. Sparkling Heart, if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment with the part that hit you most, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Fire.